Everybody, I'm here to say that I finally watched part of the Ty West X trilogy in a movie theater. Now, I had made the mistake a couple years ago when X and Pearl came out of waiting until they were basically on award screeners to watch them at home. And I vowed that I was not going to make that mistake with the third picture in this amazing trilogy by Ty West. The second film of which was kind of a secret movie. Nobody apparently knew about it until it was about ready to come out. I guess he shot it in a clandestine fashion, which if you've seen Pearl, I still don't know how that's possible because it's such a rich, like expansive, gorgeous movie and very different from the film that preceded it, X, even though Pearl is, I'm going to break my rule, a prequel that I love.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have Maxine, and I saw it in a big screen last night. Paid to go see it with a game audience, and we're going to talk about my feelings on Maxine, my feelings on the whole trilogy, and the feelings of the other assembled Earth's Mightiest Critics that I have here. A special horror panel. We've got Jeff York of the Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists, Katie Glidewell, the blonde in front, aka the bald in front, and Mark, I'm going to say it, the movie man Krawcheck of Special Mark Productions and the Spoiler Room podcast. Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to talk about Maxine and the Ty West, I guess people are just calling it the X trilogy, with y'all and see where we shake out on, did he stick the landing with this movie? Is it, a perfect trilogy, or is it a near perfect trilogy, or does it end in flames? We shall see. But yeah, kind of going around the room here. Katie, let's start with you. I know you've seen the movie twice and you've got some swag. What do you got there?
I got swag. I got a shirt.
Which counts as swag, yes.
I got a sparkler. I got
For July 4th, I assume.
I got a free drink at the screening at Alamo Draft House. I got this little thing that shows. I got a whole thing of makeup, which I'll show you guys. It came in this. It's from Half Magic that also gave away some makeup for Bodies. And I got an eyeshadow, lipstick, which I'm wearing all of it right now. To make sure you guys see.
You do a great job.
And this was all at the Alamo. This was all at the Alamo screening. They didn't do anything like that at the other ones, so that kind of sucks. But I actually, from Pin Exploitation, I have pins from X.
Nice.
Magnet, and then one of Pearl.
Nice.
Those are nice. Yeah. It's crazy that, that's like a bona fide swag bag. That's not just like, here's a poster and a baseball cap. They went all out.
Oh yeah, they really did at the Alamo. And actually not everybody got one of these. And I was very, very excited because this Half Magic makeup, I'm not getting paid to do this, by the way. So just like Half Magic makeup, honestly, I've had the lipstick that they gave people at Bodies. Love this stuff. Love it. So A24, thank you so much. Believe me, you are going to see me wearing this at all the movie screenings and all that stuff. So yeah, so happy I got that.
Now let me ask you, Katie, given all this, can you be objective about your opinions on Maxine?
Oh yes, I can. The makeup I love. I have some issues with Maxine, but I'm glad I saw it twice, just to not get the whole and revisit it and see some of the different things about it. But yeah, no, I can definitely be objective.
Okay, cool.
If someone was there for the movie, maybe I'd be a little biased. I don't know, but no, I'm
right.
I want it.
It's not like Mia Goth came out for a Q&A and personally handed out the swag bags. That was,
yes,
I would have a hard time with that. But let's see, Mark, tell us about your experience of seeing Maxine.
Well, I didn't get any swag. But that's because I waited till Thursday when it came out at the theater here, and I paid my tuition, my admission to it. They ended up putting it in one of the smaller theaters because, well, you still have Inside Out 2 going on, and you'd also have Despicable Me 4 going on. So when I went, it was quite a plethora of families in that going to those two films, so they had to put it on the smaller screen, which is fine because I mean, I don't mind it all. I figured it was going to be there. There was about 6 or 8 of us in there. It was an early screening. It was a 4:50 show, and I had fun with it. I enjoyed it as much as X, but not as much as Pearl. But I think the tough part is where we run into the issue where you were talking about prequels, Ian, is that Pearl's a different character than the other two. Even though it's a trilogy, it's not Maxine. Maxine's a different character. So since Pearl was the last one I saw, my brain had to take just a little bit to go, I'm watching Maxine now. I'm not watching Pearl. Mia Goth is in both roles. She does great in separating the two, but outside your consciousness, just from the order of watching the films, you're like, oh, wait, no, she is Maxine now. And that is a different character, and yeah, I enjoyed it as much as X. Pearl is probably my top for me, but it was fun. Yeah, I caught what they were doing with this one, which made me appreciate the trilogy more in many respects. We'll get into the spoilers later. There were a few choices near the end I wish would have been handled better, but I'm sure we'll get into it, but I don't want to give it. But overall, I enjoyed it. It was fitting considering we didn't expect to even get a horror trilogy when X came out. The fact that we got this kind of unexpected horror trilogy is pretty impressive. So, that alone moves it up a little bit, but I enjoyed it. I think it's a fun little love letter to a specific genre. So,
okay, cool. Jeff, what are your high level thoughts on Max? I keep wanting, see here, I'm giving away my bias. I keep wanting to call this movie Pearl. But
yeah,
but it's Maxine. So
It's Maxine.
what are your high level thoughts on Maxine?
Well, I think Pearl was the high watermark of the three, and to sort of follow up that when the stakes aren't nearly as sort of emphatic, or maybe in some respects as disturbing as they were in both of the first and the second one, particularly the second one, where we saw the beginning of this sort of poor woman's lot, and what created this monstrous old lady in the first movie. Those were a 1-2 punch that I think really made it something very significant in the world of horror. I think this is a movie that checks a lot of typical horror boxes in a good way, but it doesn't tick many extraordinary boxes. And my high level thinking about this, I enjoyed it the same way that Mark and Katie did. I saw it with Katie when it was the second time she saw it at the AMC. And it kept my interest. I thought it was very well done. It was Mia Goth is, again, I think, she's so committed and so vivid. But I walked out of there feeling that ultimately there wasn't as much at stake in a way, because I think by now, between either the sort of blending, and I think this is intentional, the blending of both the Maxine character and sort of the Pearl character as personified by Mia Goth playing both in the first one and then playing Pearl in the backstory sequel or prequel, as it were. I never really feared for her the way I thought maybe the film was trying to make it seem like, oh, Hollywood, Richard Ramirez, whoever is after her, Hollywood is pretty bad to young ingenues, and I'm not so sure if that's a fresh point. It was a very salient point, and I get that. There's a couple scenes we'll talk about more where I think they really made a great sort of impact with that as the theme. But ultimately, I felt it was not nearly as scary as I wanted to be, and I felt that from almost the get-go, Maxine was very much in control and not quite as, for lack of a better term, victimized as I thought she might be, and I think was kind of, in some respects, the intent of this film. Having said that, I will just share this quick, and it's a high picture, sort of high viewpoint of it, and maybe something to return to as we continue to speak. But as I was watching it, I kept being reminded of the Psycho series, where they turned Norman Bates into this very sympathetic serial killer who we should sort of loathe and hate on one hand, and yet you keep kind of feeling sorry for him, and you almost sort of root for him because of sort of the awful world around him, and maybe he's bad, but the world isn't very good either, and you kind of almost root for him in Psycho 2 to not get caught. And, the sheriff is, eating the ice cubes right out of the ice machine there, and, dead bodies in there, and you're kind of like, don't get the blood in your mouth. But I kept thinking about Norman Bates, and to that extent, and I will share this as a quick overhead cue, because it's kind of, I think, a interesting connection. Towards the last third of it, was thinking of, believe it or not, Inside Out 2, in that I thought it would be interesting to revisit these characters subsequently down the line. Like, I thought, okay, she's going to be a fucking star. And sure enough, she's a fucking star. And then she becomes, a mainstream actress in this. What next for her? What happens when she hits 30? And, actresses' careers hit that trouble mark that we still know that they do in Hollywood. Does she become a stylist, as oftentimes young actresses who tried and failed do? Or does she become a director? Or does she become a scream queen? Or what happens to her? And then I kept thinking, if they even revisited 20 years from now, what happens to her when she's at her Norma Desmond stage and she's maybe not become all the things that she's hell-bent on becoming? That could be interesting, because I think there's a story here about a woman who is near crazed in wanting to become somebody who matters. And yet it's a town that more and more is going to show that young actresses and even talented people don't matter quite the way they want to and have the successes that they want to. And what would that do to the psychosis of this very psychotic character? So in some respects, the movie made me want to see more of her, even though I think the third film ultimately becomes a little bit of a disappointing film, because she never seems that much in danger. She never seems that much out of control. And even arguably, as we'll get into it, I think the third act, with who the real stalker and problem isn't nearly as compelling as you'd wanted it to be.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think we're just going to jump right into spoilers, because
Sure, why not?
I'll just say, I agree with you, Jeff. This movie is an hour and 44 minutes or something like that. I was with it for the first hour 15, hour 20. But once we get into who is doing all these killings in Los Angeles in 1985, kind of coinciding with Maxine's ascent to stardom, it just kind of bothered me, because it's a really weird turn, and it's a callback to the opening shot of the film, which is a black and white kind of home movie of Maxine Miller as a 12-year-old girl, kind of performing it for her father, who's a church pastor or some religious figure of note, and he's saying talking about success, and you see the cross in the background, everything. And at the end of the movie, it turns out that Dad has been leading this religious cult or offshoot of some, church, in an effort to, I guess, I don't even know what they wanted to do. They wanted to use Maxine as an example of, a Christian in a fallen world, and exorcise the demons that are possessing her, and make it into a movie to show the world the truth or something. It got very convoluted, very weird, and I felt like it was a bit of a mixed message, because Ty West goes out of his way to couple this with the Nightstalker. Was that Richard Ramirez?
Yes.
Am I remember that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct. Yep.
So all throughout the film, you've got news footage and people talking about being afraid of the Nightstalker, the maniac. You don't want to go out at night alone, especially if you're a woman. Always go in pairs. Don't go in, dark alleys, and certainly don't go around with strangers. And at the end of the film, it coincides with Maxine triumphing over her father, and then also the Nightstalker gets arrested. I'm like, I feel like she should have just been almost this movie is so Tarantino in its reimagining of kind of historical. You think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think is the big influence of this movie. But I almost wish it had been Maxine against the Nightstalker, and leave out all the other religious stuff. Have that as a side plot, oh, my dad tried to do this weird thing with me once. I don't know. But it was so ham-handed. And honestly, I think I was biased by the trailers that I watched in the theater before this, because there were at least two movies where it's oh, Catholicism and Christianity are, really evil, and they're trying to pervert people, and they're really, the devil is behind religion and all this other stuff. So by the time I got to the climax of Maxine, I'm like, this is not it, guys. Just stop. And there was the whole religious panic of the 80s, which I understand, it's a nice little flavoring, but to have this whole cult coming out and doing this weird, bizarre thing. It just didn't land. I feel like you needed to have that be the through line, or take out the Nightstalker angle.
Yes. I think the Nightstalker angle should have been just completely taken out. I'm very glad they did not say his name, mainly because I'm done sensationalizing serial killers. I've watched a documentary that talked about the Nightstalker, and seeing those insane, gross women when he was at his trial, like sending him nude photos, disgusts me, knowing what he did to so many people, including children. So I'm glad that they did not say his name. But I think there's enough going on with the satanic panic in the 80s that I think they could have just taken out the Nightstalker aspect altogether. I feel this movie is about reinvention and then throwing in the like little new Coke and stuff like that, because so many of the characters are reinventing themselves that we kind of know a little bit about them. Like even Maxine, like she made it to stardom with pornography. She's now 32. She talks about turning 33. She wants to do that. I actually thought that I didn't realize it'd only been like 6 years since X, because it definitely seemed like it was longer. Like, I mean, those 6 years she has aged herself. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I mean, it's 1980s porn. I mean, she's made a name and stuff like that. But I almost thought that the film had too much star power to it. And, but also the characters then that they had, each one of them were reinventing themselves. I love the Elizabeth Debicki character as a female horror director. It reminded me of Slumber Party Massacre and stuff like that. But it's like each one of these characters, I would like to see a whole separate film regarding them, including the cops. Because, I mean, Bobby Cannavale had some of the worst lines in the film, and yet he knew it and he called it. And Michelle Monaghan would call him out on that, which was it's like as soon as he would say some of this stuff, I'd be like, oh, that's so cheesy. And then she would look at him like, really? He's like, what was wrong with that? That was a good line. What was wrong? And I'm like, okay, so at least you're in on the joke and stuff. But I would love to have known more about that. But yeah, I actually liked the whole thing at the end. But the ending, as Mark said, to me, they needed to flip that. I thought the ending did not stick the landing. I thought the whole thing when she's like in the Puritan which wasn't necessarily ending, which would have happened a month before. I think when she's on the red carpet, she says the line that her dad says, you show what happens to her and her dad. That should have been the ending. The scene when they're filming the Puritan 2, I think, I never want this to end. And then you see her being interviewed like you did this. And then they show her on the red carpet. I think that would have been a better ending, revisiting what happened to her dad, to stick the landing and say, bam, this is done. But I think the ending that we got sort of opens it up to a possibility of this not being a trilogy and possibly maybe something else could happen, which I think it should just end right now.
Yeah, there doesn't need to be any more. On top of that, like the last, we're jumping all around here, so there's really is for people who have seen the movie and know what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah.
But the last, Pearl ended with a great. It was almost like the Police Squad ending, where it's Pearl with this giant smile on her face, like in the kitchen and holding for 8 minutes or whatever, how long the duration goes on, and it's actually Bia Goth holding this crazed position. They don't freeze frame it, and at the end of this movie, it's her a dummy of her decapitated head for this fantasy sequence for this Puritan 2 movie, and they hold on that, and the credits start coming up. I'm like, oh, that'd be kind of fun, like just have this severed head be the image that you're leaving the theater with. But no, they go out and they do almost like the American Beauty thing where they're floating up and up and up and up, and eventually we're in space and then we're in the black of the credits, and of course we fly by the MAXXINE as the Hollywood sign logo, which was the teaser for this movie that kind of alerted everyone to the fact there was going to be a third film. I get it, but I've already seen that in a teaser. It's not special anymore. It's a weird bit of punctuation. It's almost like a comma when you need a period. Yeah, as far as the cops go, I'm going to try and figure out how to say this. The whole film feels very 1985, like start to finish. I mean, there were moments when I was watching it, I got pulled out of the film in a good way, thinking this feels like a movie that I would have rented, back in the
Yeah.
days for a sleepover. Not only just the costumes and the references. I mean, there are a lot of deep cuts in this movie, which I appreciate. It's not just like a Stranger Things, like, hey, look, there's a poster on my wall. But in terms of some of the character dynamics, like I liked Elizabeth Debicki as the director, but I felt like there wasn't enough like grimy male chauvinism in Hollywood that really accentuated what people think of that era and that time. There's a bit too much, and again, I'm treading lightly here, a bit too much female empowerment and too much female mentoring in this movie to feel authentic. If you look at the cops, Michelle Monaghan's character always has the upper hand. Bobby Cannavale's character is always the joke. He never gets one up on her in terms of the one-liners. He's always the butt of the joke. He's the guy who's got the machismo. He runs off to kind of try and capture the bad guys at the end, gets up, horribly shot. There was just, I think they needed to reel that back. I understand the impulse to be a bit more representative in 2024, but if you're trying to make a period film that feels like a period film, I think it needs to go back to an era which, as uncomfortable as it is, we look at it with disdain and admire our progress for a reason, because it was not what we see in Maxine.
And if you don't mind me building on that for a second, Ian, too, that was I think my biggest problem with this is that I think they wanted to make her more likable, have more allies. I think one of the key scenes in it, when she gets Kevin Bacon's sleazy private eye into the trash compactor in his car, she's flankered by the two ally friends of hers who also help in that. That's wrong. She should be doing all this alone. This is about this woman's determination to do it and do it alone. I mean, even in the first movie when the other people are getting killed, her determination is like, I'm going to be a star. She's single-minded on it, and nobody's getting in the way, even this old lady who wants to ruin it, and that kind of stuff. Pearl was a great sort of mirror of that, because Pearl felt the same thing. That's why Mia Goth was playing both roles, because I think somewhere in Ty West's mind, he had this mirror image of that Pearl was the same thing, and she lost her opportunity, and maybe Maxine will succeed where she didn't, because she is so determined. But I think the scene that worked to your point in this movie and could have been the template for all the rest of it, which it wasn't, was where the Buster Keaton celebrity impersonator off of Hollywood and Vine, who you think, oh, he's dressed as Buster Keaton, he even knows who Buster Keaton is, that's got to be kind of charming. No, he's a vicious, evil stalker too. You never know in that town. You never know who you're coming across at any alleyway or any street, and it's that kind of place, especially for young women in that town, which chews them up and spits them out anyway. The porn industry, we know what that does still to this day. And the 80s, when there was a lot of that sort of exploitation, and we were sort of moving into much more explicit stuff, and the blending of violence and sort of sensuality became a staple of not only mainstream cinema, but certainly Hollywood as well. Brian De Palma, the big filmmaker from the 80s, was constantly dealing with stuff like the battles with Body Double and Dress to Kill and some of those kind of things. She should have been standing alone for all this. And if she became, even scarier, the more formidable she was, great. But to your point, they had to surround her with allies. They had to surround her with a women empowerment thing. The female detective is, acting like she's been a female detective for 40 years and that, the guy is the doofus. It's like, no, that's not what it was in the 80s. And porn wasn't that in the 80s. And that town wasn't what. I think it would have been a scarier and more impressive film if, as she realized that nobody can rely on anybody in this town. You're always alone, sort of the motto of life. You're always alone in life in some degree anyway. I mean, ultimately, but certainly in that town. And it would have made a scarier film. It would have made a more vulnerable character, but it just seemed wrong. Like all these people who are sort of contributing into her psychosis and homicidal mania. When she turns the tables and kills that Buster Keaton lookalike, and
we don't know that he's dead.
She definitely kills his nuts, but I don't think.
Well, okay, maybe she didn't kill him, but all right, yeah, stomps his nuts and makes makes him a eunuch, or metaphorically kills him, or I guess whatever. Nonetheless, she beats him. Okay, that to me was like the most interesting scene, because you think, okay, she's in trouble and she turns the tables because that's her personality. This is the Norman Bates thing. There is a psychosis there. That would have been more interesting. But as soon as she has allies and Elizabeth Debicki is all over, it would have been much more interesting if that was somebody like Brian De Palma, who was also exploiting her and sort of, playing her and, dating her, wanting to date her like he did with Nancy Allen. I'm just there. Those kind of things would have been more interesting for her to navigate. Like, is this about me as his girlfriend or his wife, or am I really good and she's not sure? Or is this about, somebody who's a psycho killer dressed up like Buster Keaton? Or do I have to worry about every last person I encounter on the street? And I think that's where they lost a little bit of this, because I think they wanted, to your point, cast it with the glaze or the gaze of the modern world, which was not true in the 80s. And it shouldn't have been about female empowerment. It should have been about Maxine's empowerment, even if that means she's doing it so in a sociopathic way.
Well, I mean, there's a bit of the other movie, and I haven't watched this in, I don't know, it's probably been 40 years. I watched it when I was way too young, and it was always on TV, and my dad watched it with me, which is weird. Angel.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
Like mad guy with a switchblade, or he was a maniac stalking people. There's a prostitute in, I think, L.A. or someplace, and they ended up, he was obsessed with her or something. I haven't seen it in forever, but I kept thinking about that and how this movie could have been the down and dirty version of that. Imagine if you had, it doesn't have to be the Nightstalker. It could be, I mean, any kind of brand X, no pun intended, serial killer gets a fascination with Maxine and is killing everybody in her orbit to get to her or something. Yeah. But imagine you've got a serial killer going after a psychopath. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And but because that whole thing in the alley, that's a beautiful setup. I was, after that moment, I'm like, oh, where is this character going? This feels dangerous. But by the end of the movie, it's almost like that scene never happened. But
she's almost too vulnerable, too helped by everybody else. Where I think they didn't feel like they pulled their punch. They didn't go for her psychosis.
See, and I wouldn't say that she was helped too much. I say that she enlisted help, but she enlisted help by choice. It's not like she got help or rescued. She chose these options, and with her character the way it is, it made sense within the context of Maxine, not Pearl, because Maxine, she's been trying to stay, as much as it's the parallelism with Maxine, with what she did in Texas. The point I think they were trying with this film was that she's trying to fine line of becoming famous, but at the same time, not. In that her past transgressions, she's really trying to hide, and at the same time, she's also trying to be famous. And those two things collide with her getting the videotape, and her turning to her wonderful agent. I think they were using that more as a tool, because this isn't just about Maxine. It's a little, it makes statements here with this film, which I get what you guys are saying. They could have just made it about Maxine, but it's also about a statement of some of the film industry, but not going too deep with it, in that showing that the agents would do anything for their client, like even kill a PI. Now, maybe not doing it that well, and maybe is not needed, but that's the way I felt with this. Maxine turned to her agent because she wanted to look at a way that she could possibly do this without getting noticed. And
Mark, I'm not disagreeing with that plot point. I agree with everything you said. I disagree with the reason that's in the movie. I think it distracts. I think it's it asks for nuance in a character and a role that an agent plays in somebody's professional life that is inaccurate. And a little bit, especially with at her station, I think it distracts from ultimately, because this is a trilogy and it is about I will prevail no matter what. That is the story. And then here, I will prevail with the help of my friends who are willing to be as homicidal as I am. I think it distracts. Even though I agree with what you're saying, that's why it's in the story. But I think it's also in the story to make her a little bit more vulnerable and or likable and or sympathetic, when I think that's a pulled punch, because I think it's interesting is like, would we still be cheering her on if she was sociopathic and alone and taking care of herself without these people guiding her, helping her, assisting her, being the sort of mentor as Elizabeth Debicki character was. If that was a director who she had to question whether he was really wanting to get in her pants or he just wanted her to be a star because she was good, that's what actresses deal with. Not, I'm doing an art house horror movie. Really? In the 80s? No, there were no art house horror movies in the 80s.
Well, I would.
But there
hold
are
on a
barely
second.
any female directors in the 80s either. And I mean,
exactly.
If that's
through the lens of today.
Twist it, then that's the way she's got to twist it.
Yeah, I was going to say the exception. What I thought about watching Elizabeth Debicki's character was, and this is probably because I just talked to John Miller a few weeks ago, was I thought of Catherine Bigelow and Near Dark.
Mm-hmm.
Taking I don't know if these conversations were happening, but that is an elevated horror movie. It's not just a vampire movie. It's really about more things. It has a different kind of language than other films. And I'm not disagreeing with you, Jeff. I'm saying that, like, looking at let me just back up here. Giancarlo Esposito's character, he's Maxine's agent with an amazingly bad hairpiece.
Hairpiece.
That's the one thing I got out of his performance in this movie was that hairpiece. But I guess my question is, was he her agent? Like they had a long-standing relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm to believe that he is trying to help her get into Hollywood, but also he's been helping her book these porn films, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what kind of fantasy land or what they're trying to say of, I'm a youngish starlet in Hollywood in the porn industry, and I've got this agent who's doing nothing but looking out for my own, he loves me like a father figure. He's not sleazy or questionable at all, except he's got these mob ties or whatever enough to get someone compacted in a junkyard. Everything seemed a bit too clean. This movie needed to be way more Alice in Wonderlandy if we're to believe that she's in this fantasy version of Hollywood 1985. But it's like walking that line, like everything is gritty and horrible and violent and awful, except when it comes to the direct orbit of this main character. I think that if we had the Maxine from the opening audition, the kind of the tough, rough around the edges, but really scarily committed and able to get into that zone and act that monologue from start to finish, and have her kind of, the threat is, sure, there's a Nightstalker, but in terms of the threat to her idea of how to make it in Hollywood, that's Elizabeth Debicki's character, simply by saying, look, you show up on my set one more time, I'll have someone else on a red eye to replace you in the morning. That's badass. She doesn't need to pick up a gun or squash anybody's nuts. It's that, that's what you need to do. That's what I could tell what her career path was in Hollywood and how awful that was and how disciplined she had to be in that one line than half of what Maxine does in the movie, even though it's kind of awesome. Katie, jump in here.
I love the fact that you had these female empowerment characters, like with Michelle Monaghan. Yeah, I mean, she doesn't have to be a 40-year detective to have that attitude, especially towards her partner, who they keep saying was an ex-actor and stuff like that, and just kind of threw in. I mean, I would say she's probably been a detective or been in the police force longer than him, and she's giving him attitude because it's like, dude, seriously, you're 10 years older than me. You've been doing this way less, and yet you keep saying this stupid shit. I'm going to take control of this because you blew it every single time and didn't get what she needed. I like the fact that you've got these women who are talking to Maxine, trying to get her to help, so that the rest of because every other woman that she encounters ends up being a victim of her father. Elizabeth Debicki, as I said, I love her director character. I love the mentorship. I love that she's like saying, like, look, I didn't get here. This wasn't easy for me. But if you mess up one more time, I'm getting somebody else in because you're not going to mess up what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, she gave her one chance, which was
one chance.
nice. Yeah.
And the fact that you can tell that Maxine, it's like from X to here. In X, it's like everyone kept telling her, you've got that X factor, you're going to be a star and all that stuff. You've got 6 years where, she made it great in the porn industry, but now she's realizing that, okay, I want something like better than this, and I'm gonna do whatever I need. You know, the guy her friend who works at the video store, it's like, who's only her friend, who he even says like, yeah, I'm the only one who's not trying to sleep with you. And then Giancarlo Esposito. I mean, the fact that when she it's like, you're my lawyer, it's like, I'm your agent and your lawyer, it's like, all right, so that what I can tell you is going to be completely confidential. When he hears that story, he's like, dude, why didn't you tell me this? It's like, let's figure this out, because Kevin Bacon is the sleaziest. He's the only character that I was so happy that happened to. It's like, he's so, those teeth, everything about him, his accent. I mean, he is the grossest character I have seen on screen, I think, all year long. So kudos to you, Bacon. But honestly, with the two guys that assisted her in doing this, I think they know that it's like, look, if she dies, we're out a lot of money. It's like, because either way, it's like the agent and the guy who worked in the porn, whatever that was. He wasn't the actor, but he definitely worked in the porn location that she was doing. It's like, they knew, it's like, look, we need to look out for our investment. So I don't necessarily think that they were just doing that just to be like allies and like help her out. But it's like, if she's done, we're out a lot of money. Esposito,
right. Again, though,
Katie, it's like,
you and Mark are explaining
and all that stuff, and that's one of those things that it's like, yeah, she was definitely on her own this entire film, even with her friends, and even looking out to see like what I have to do to make sure this doesn't happen to me.
Well, with her friends, I would take issue with that. She decided to, I mean, she got the opportunity to go be on the movie set, and she was also working two jobs. So it's not like, I mean, they went off on their own. She was not mixed up with them, right? So that's point one. The thing with the agent, again, there's nothing about his character that says Hollywood 1985 porn agent. I understand him wanting to protect his investment, but I think that should have been explicit and part of his character, not so much like, yeah, I'm your friend, and oh, by the way, I'm just going to help you murder someone based on your word. As far as Kevin Bacon goes, yeah, they did a lot with, hair and makeup, and, he looks gross, and he's kind of a strange character, but I didn't buy him as a private eye. We see him towards the beginning, like talking to the Giallo killer, as I'll call him, which I really appreciated that. Like, oh shit, Maxine is a secret Giallo movie.
Yeah,
it's not really, but he's like, look, I'm helping you tail this girl, but if you want to do anything more than that, that's going to be more money. I'm like, I don't know what this character is, because he ends up straight up working for this cabal of Christian people, these cult murderers or whoever they are. There's no like transition there. Like, I'm not saying this guy has to have a code of ethics, but it's one thing to follow someone. It's another to facilitate whatever bad business he's aware that is going on with them. The last point I want to say about the cops, Katie, you're talking about them as if they're real people. They're not. They're characters who were written. That whole thing. I get what you're saying. She's probably been on the force longer than he has. He looks like he's older than his female partner and everything. That's fine. But Ty West, in writing these characters, chose to have him to be the butt of the joke. No one takes him seriously. She doesn't take him seriously. He's always blowing the interrogations. So yeah, all I can do is look at that and be like, this is a guy who's trying to write from a male feminist point of view, and I see it right through it. It's not believable, and I think it's unworthy of the kinds of rich characters that have been in the previous two films, and even some of the characters that are in this one.
I think it's a distraction too. I think the trouble with some of these kind of movies, and I think you can see the ambition, and maybe Ty West was trying to do a little bit of Tarantino here with multiple characters, and he's casted with stars. Those characters are unimportant. The detectives are there for one thing: to fail, to not help her in any way, shape, and form. And when you've got her agent, who's suddenly the one agent in Hollywood in the porn industry in the 80s, who's actually a sweet mensch, it's a distraction. I think this movie should have been more like High Noon. She's alone. She may want help. She may look for it. And ultimately, she is left alone. The police don't help her. Her friends can't help her. You know, maybe they can't help her because they're getting killed by this person who's trying to eliminate anybody else around. And he's obsessed with her as a fan or something like that. But I think it's all a distraction. And you're putting a lot of reading into the characters that is unimportant. It may be or may not be, depending on what he was intended to write. But I think the fact that they give so much time to those two detective characters when essentially they're Dennis Franz in Dressed to Kill, he's there to not help Nancy Allen. That's the only reason he's there. And to put Nancy Allen to have to turn to the kid because they're the ones who have to figure out the crime because the police aren't going to help. I think all that other stuff is window dressing, distraction, and star fucking, because those roles didn't need to be played by actors of Bobby Cannavale's quality. And the fact that he's got as much scenery to chew as he does or that kind of stuff, I find distracts from Pearl. This became a little bit too much of an ensemble film when it should really have been all about Maxine.
Yeah, I thought the film was going in a direction which would have been very much a cliche, but I think it would have worked. Take the cult aspect out of it. If it had just been her dad who had gone around the bend because maybe he found out about what happened in Texas, was not so much upset that his daughter was involved somehow in this mass killing spree, but that she was part of a porn set, that sends him around the bend with this perfect idea of his Christian girl. He follows her to Hollywood and starts murdering everybody that is connected to her,
enabling her.
The gay best friend who works in the video store, you know, and he's black. Oh, that's, you know, perfect target. You've got the agent, you know, make him a target because all these people that he doesn't believe that she has, you know, done this of her own volition. That would have been a very powerful statement. You know, at the end, she can confront her dad and say, look, I chose this life. I have my own agency and my own person. I'm not possessed by the devil. Dad, you're, you know, messed up and weird and you've killed all my friends. And then she blows his head off. Cliche, yes. But I think it would have been a straight line rather than, I think, to Jeff's point, these distractions. When the best friend gets killed at the video store, what I thought was a really impressive, you know, scene worthy of some, you know, great 70s and 80s giallo, very brutal. But the next day, when they're wheeling the body out of the video store, they have a huge crowd, you know, on wherever they are. The Hollywood Walk of Fame is like
Hollywood Boulevard. Yeah.
Hollywood Boulevard. Maxine comes down from her apartment because she lives upstairs. Michelle Monaghan is there with the stretcher. This blood-soaked gurney is coming out. And what does she do? She flips the sheet open to show that it's the best friend in front of everybody. I'm like, I don't know that is police protocol, because A, she had to know that she was going to incite Maxine to bust through the line, but also you're exposing this, you know, this crowd of people, there could have been kids there or whatever, to this horribly mutilated corpse. What is that? It just felt like manipulation instead of this film. It felt like the most manipulative and the least organic of the trilogy. And that's why I say I loved the first hour and 15 until I realized that all this stuff that I've been kind of putting up with, like, oh, I guess, but it's still Ty West. I love these movies. By the time we get to the end of the film, like, oh, yeah.
Well, it makes me wonder, because Pearl and X took off more than, I'm going to say, probably the studios expected to, especially Pearl.
Definitely.
I suspect, because even in my review, I said, as much as I enjoyed X, this one feels like it pulls its punches in a number of ways. In its
Maxine?
Maxine.
Yeah,
Maxine seems to pull its punches in a number of ways that almost feels like this is, and I don't know anything about the behind the scenes and background, and this isn't just my bias. It feels like there was a little bit more studio input into this film in a few ways than the first one, because he shot Pearl back to back with it, and supposedly he told very few people, even at the studio, he was shooting Pearl. They literally kind of did it on the down low,
which I don't. Mark, help me out with
I know
this.
you don't quite get.
No, I want to know. I'm curious. I assume you believe that story. I want to believe. I'm Fox Mulder in this situation, but Pearl is
said. He actually at the Maxine screening, he said that the reason why they did Pearl is because they were in quarantine in New Zealand. So he wrote a script within 2 weeks And it's like, what are we going to do with the set? And they decided to do Pearl.
I understand that, but I'm just saying that Pearl, it's not like you just did Friday the 13th, so all you need to do to make a part 2 is like, hey, we've got the campground, we've got a bloody axe, put a sack on the guy and send him out after a bunch of naked teenagers. You're talking about a film that is a complete 180 from the film that preceded it. It's a period piece. It looks like it was, shot in, Panavision or something like that. It's very colorful, amazing, like whole new costumes, whole cast of actors. I mean, I don't doubt it. I just still don't understand how it's true, but especially if you're going to do that on the down low, that movie looks expensive as all hell for being a lower to mid budget. We'll call that Hollywood movie.
And I get it. And maybe it just goes along line with part of it being true in that he started it and wrote it and presented it to him. And like, as said during COVID, they have the crew and everything there. So the studio may have said, well, we could, all right, we'll let you do that film as well, figuring, we'll see what comes of it if they actually finish it or whatnot. And then they do, and it gets released because X is so popular. They actually released Pearl, because when I saw a Pearl trailer at the end of X, I thought it was fake. I thought it was one of those fake teasers. Because of the way the rest of the film was a bit meta, I was like, this is awesome. Okay, that's great. And then I got out and like the next day learned, no, Pearl's a real movie. I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to the theater. It was a great hook. And whether or not the studio, I suspect they may have started it and he said, hey, look at this. Maybe they even did some test footage and he sent, we're locked in New Zealand in quarantine. By the way, we shot this little scene here. Check it out. And they were like, oh yeah, okay, see what you do. We got everything there, and then X takes off and they're like, oh, this Pearl project that he did on the side while in quarantine that we maybe would have just dumped to streaming, we'll release it. Everybody loved it. So, but I guess where I was going with it is it felt like those first 2 films definitely had more Ty West in it. In this one felt a little bit more like it may have had, and I don't know for sure, maybe they did. But it really feels like they got a little more studio fingers in the pot in that the salacious sex stuff. I mean, she's literally been working in the porn industry for 6 years, and we saw X and what it had when they were shooting their little video, and we get one scene and we get kind of a blurry scene in the background. Now, I'm not saying you got to go full Monty all the time, but what I'm just saying is,
I'm saying it.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, full blown, Mark? Was that what you said?
Yeah, exactly. But the grittiness that Ty West is going for felt almost cleaned up, and I don't think that was probably Ty West's choice so much as someone going, hey, we're letting you do this third film, but you gotta not necessarily, because there's points in this film where it really calls for it. You could, like you said, the video store kill, and there's a couple other points, but a lot of this really feels a little bit tamed down from the other 2. And you would think with the subject material in that you would go all in. And it really just makes me wonder, and with the star power too, it makes me wonder how much of that was full his decision and part of it was, well, no, because in all honesty, I'm going to tell you, because maybe I fail as a critic. I'll give you my card. You can have it. That's fine. I only recognize 3 of the faces. I only recognized 3 of the faces in this. I did not recognize the director. I did not recognize the cops at all. I did not, because maybe I haven't seen them in enough films or whatnot. I didn't recognize them. So for me, I didn't know them. So you guys are saying this is an ensemble cast or whatnot. And when Kevin Bacon showed up, I totally forgot he was in here. So when he shows up as this skeezy PI, I loved it. I'm like, oh, look at Kevin Bacon. He's getting, he's at that age now where he could just grab whatever role he wanted, So, but I get what you guys are saying. I guess for me, and I got a theory about the third act. Now shut up. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. It's just that for me, I guess I didn't notice that too much, so it didn't distract me as much because I wasn't as familiar with the rest of the actors outside of, the 3 people.
When we offline, Mark, I can tell you some of the movies you would definitely know these actors from.
Yes.
But yeah, no, but I get what you're saying. For me, it was partially the actors and partially the characters, and partially because I know that I respect these actors and I know they can do great with great material. I just feel like the script at a certain point kind of underserved them.
There's an old...
I was just real quick, Jeff.
Sure, please.
I can't remember if it was you or if it was Mark who said about the trailer and the star power. I started off this show by saying I had to see this movie in a theater because I missed the boat on the first two, and I said I'd never let that happen again. Especially with Pearl and the opening up of the doors, that beautiful,
Oh,
oh my
yeah.
god, it's
Mhm.
iconic, right?
It is. It
It
is.
is.
And we get a kind of a lesser version of that with the opening up of the Hollywood
Mhm,
lot, but at
mhm,
least I admire the
mhm.
consistency, the theme throughout all the films. But when I saw the trailer for Maxine, and I started seeing all these names and like actual Hollywood stars, I'm like,
Mhm.
oh no,
Yeah,
Yeah.
they made it too big of a
I don't,
production.
I got a bad feeling about this. Now,
Mhm.
in fairness, maybe a lot of these people are fans of Ty West. You're like, oh, I would love to, I'd read the phone
Mhm.
book for that man because I love
Mhm.
Pearl and X. That's fine. But to the point that you were making, Mark, I think, well, let me just ask a question. I know I'm going all over the place, but did X and Pearl get mainstream wide releases? I remember them being more like art house, kind of like lower circuit kind of films,
Mhm.
but did they play in like AMC's?
Yeah.
They
Mhm.
did? Okay.
But they were still
No,
considered a
X
little
did.
bit. They weren't considered, for lack of a better term, major releases. I think they were kind of, uh, the smaller pictures that also get released in the summer, but they're not like the 20 films we're all looking forward to this year. It's not, there wasn't something that, where this one suddenly, because of the popularity of those two films, became sort of, a bigger film. The one thing I was going
Well,
to
that,
say, and in fairness to Katie, who I more often than not agree with entirely, and she's one of the great critics of horror, as is Mark, and we've talked about it on these panels about wanting to do and make films better than what we saw. And I know that's a little bit unfair to the film because you have to kind of review what you've seen, and maybe I was a little harsh on Katie reading stuff into it, but when I was watching this film, not only did I feel there were a lot of distractions, but I also hate to say this, and I don't want to sound snobby or anything like that. I kept thinking of better stories that aren't being told here, including just the simple tract of like the female character in both of these previous movies is a sociopath. And what does that do to us? Whether it's Tony Soprano or Walter White or Dexter Morgan, I mean, there's something interesting about that, particularly with what we know happens with actresses and how they get chewed up and spit out, whether it's Sunset Boulevard or Mulholland Drive or, all the stuff that we know of today. And, what was it, Goldie Hawn's line in the First Wives Club? You're either the ingenue, the mother, or driving Miss Daisy, and it's so true. Um, there were so many of those stories that could have been told here. I think, he clearly was channeling Brian De Palma through this. This almost felt like a Brian De Palma movie. But the 80s were all about exploitation. How about the accessibility of video and sleaze now in our homes? When she was doing X, that was probably a movie that was still going to be showing at the Pussycat Theater in town. Now in the 80s, mid 80s, it was all accessible at home at your local video store. If it's not her dad going after her, is it a fan who thinks he knows her because he watched her so many times at home and all of her oeuvre, whatever like that? So many different things. I mean, I was even reminded, and again, this is a different movie, but it could have been shades of this because I know he was influenced by what he was dealing with Body Double in the Brian De Palma influence. But Brian De Palma wanted to cast Annette Haven as the Holly Body character in Body Double. And she was an actual X-rated superstar in the 80s. And she was the advisor on it for many months. He had told her she was going to play the role. She was auditioned for it, and she was an accomplished actress, if you will, in the adult film world. I guess, they do have degrees of talent in that, not just for the sex scenes. And the studio said, over our dead body, we're not doing that. And so he had to break it to her, and it devastated her. And, you think about Hollywood and some of those kind of things, all those stories out there to tell. And I think they got close to it with her. You're alone. You're alone in this town. Every corner is a dangerous place. You don't know whether it's your dad or a fan or an awful director or a sleazy PI who knows your past or a fan or some scuzzball guy pretending to be Buster Keaton on Hollywood and Vine. That's the story. And her standing up against that alone, I think, to me, that's what the first two movies are about. At the end, only Maxine could defeat Pearl, and in Pearl, nobody could defeat Pearl, and she was actually the same thing. Although we saw what happened to her when she didn't get her way, and she turns into this crazy psycho killer towards the end. I think this was a simpler version of that, and could have been interesting because of all the things that came about in the 80s. but they didn't do enough of that. It's too easy to go after church. It's too easy to draw a parallel to the Nightstalker when it has nothing to do with the story. I kept thinking from the trailer as well, and they sold it. I think it's a lie that you think, oh, the Nightstalker's after her, or somehow she's going to have a confrontation with him or something else. And even the way the Nightstalker was caught with the community turning against him and basically chasing him and beating him up for 5 blocks, sort of the people against him and sort of what that said about true crime and people following it and also becoming part of the story. There's all that they could have, I think, explored more here. But to Mark's point, and to some of the things Katie was saying too, is I think they're trying to make more of these supporting characters. They're pulling punches. You can see they want her to be more likable, so they put all these allies around her. And it just doesn't quite have the same feel as those other 2 superior films. Despite a great performance from her, some very well done period stuff. I mean, to your point, Ian, early on, I think the details and sort of the look and feel of this, even the flatter cinematography with a little bit of that fuzzy 80s look that they had. Bravo, Ty West. I mean, it felt like this was a straight-to-video exploitation film on their VHS shelves in your local, mom and pop video store. But I think he loses the thread of what he had developed in the 2 previous films and could have kept going with this one.
Yep.
I want to say that the opening quotes by Betty Davis, it's like, in this business, until you're known as a monster, you're not a star. Yeah. I feel like that says so much about Maxine and everything that she's going through, because with Pearl, we see how she's a star. She becomes a monster, but then she ends up doing nothing with it. Like, she's still stuck. We see her in her Texas town on the farm that she swore she would get out of. She killed multiple people, fed them to her alligator, but she's still there. And and
she still wants to be loved and adored.
She still wants to be, and she still wants to be a star. She still has that. Like, I had this thing that now I see this young girl that has, and I should have done that. And she's the one who ends up killing everybody, and then Maxine kills her. For this, it's like, I love the fact that you bookend, that quote from Betty Davis, and then the Betty Davis Eyes song at the end, which we haven't even talked about the soundtrack. And I love the fact, one, that you've got Man in Motion when she's like fucking killing Kevin Bacon's face. Yes. Who says this, and that is very accurate to when that song was number 1. So I have to give it to them on the timeline. But you also have in this film so many little Easter eggs to Pearl and X, especially Pearl. Because did anyone notice that the carafe of cocaine that's on the porn set, it's in a goose. It's in a goose. She takes it out. That is very much in Pearl. Theta Bara was Theta was the name of the crocodile in Pearl and was Pearl's pet. And her story as an actress, I mean, she was typecast as this like vampire because she had dark hair. She was in these films. She tried to do something else. Hollywood rejected her. And I feel like that's kind of the thing that Maxine's trying not to do. And all this reinvention and like trying to, do something with her career that everyone is telling her she can't do. I loved all these like little Easter egg nuances to the other 2 films. And even in Pearl, I didn't even realize that till I rewatched it. When she goes into town during 1918, everyone's wearing the mask because of the Spanish flu and stuff. There's a guy who's wearing a placard that says, "I will not accept a life I do not deserve." That I had never seen that before and it's one of the things, that's why I'm love that we're like doing this panel so I can like investigate these films and stuff like that. But I love the fact that they didn't over 80s the movie. They didn't have everyone with, the neon and stuff like that so many 80s movies do. This is very accurate in the wardrobe. This is very accurate in just in the cars and everything. And then even you have a little bit of Jenna Ortega with the porn killed my daughter, which you see that guy who's got a shirt that's very not exactly looking like Jenna Ortega, but it's definitely Ortega from the Texas one. So what you're saying
is you're wanting another sequel with Maxine where, keeping the Betty Davis theme going, she turns into Baby Jane. Which is
I mean, that would Who
about to
knows?
say,
It could happen. I feel
themes,
like from
same
the
exact
ending
themes.
of this film,
Oh,
it's not an ending. I feel like
Yeah.
if they had, her blowing the dad's head off, stick the landing for that ending, I feel like that would have been like, okay, trilogy, we're done, we're moving on. I feel like when she's sitting there, it's like, I never want this to end. It's like that to me is saying like, are you guys opening the door to something else? And thing is, Ty West kind of alluded that when he did the interview after the Alamo showing. He's like, we don't know, we'll see. I mean, this is A24's first trilogy, so there's, never say never. We'll see what happens.
Well, okay. First, you're putting something great into my head, Katie. If the movie had ended with the dad getting his head blown off, then that could have been your final shot with the credits going over it, because you could have this corpse and then you've got like the cleanup crew coming to like shovel the bits and evidence and like police, lights
Yep.
and stuff shining on it for the entire time. But no, I have not watched X or Pearl in probably, what is it, 2 years or whatever, since I only watched them once,
22.
although they had huge impact mentally. But 1918, World War I, was there was a shot in Maxine where she's walking in one of the Hollywood backlots, and there's very conspicuous shot of these. They look like World War I era soldiers in the kind of the brown outfits
Yep.
marching along. I
Yes.
thought that was a
Yep.
direct
Another Easter egg.
allusion
Yep,
to
that's another
Pearl.
little
Because
nod.
her husband was also in the war. You'll
Right.
remember from Pearl. Yep.
Yes. Now, I feel like they needed to zero in on these Easter eggs and these themes from the other films and really come up with something that I think is worthy of all the analysis from these other movies, and ditch Kevin Bacon's character altogether, or at least find something different to do with him. I mean, like, again, distractions. I mentioned the cop pulling the sheet off the head coming out of the video store, but when Maxine goes over to the car and she's Wolverining those car keys between her knuckles, she blindly like starts like shoving, like punching into his face and neck, and later we just see him like he's got the Chinatown nose. I'm like, no, if you're going to Wolverine someone with car keys sticking out of your knuckles, you're talking carotid, you're talking, I'm surprised he had an eyeball left, cut up cheeks, all that, because she's like going it's not like it's a one and done.
See,
like,
that would have been better if
this
that was
movie?
the end of them there. That was the end of them there. Like,
well, I
that's
thought
how-
that's where they were going
that's
for.
the surprise
was,
and the viciousness and like how quickly she does that. She's not taking any prisoners, just like Pearl did. I mean, she doesn't give somebody a second chance in that movie.
And it's building up to it could have built up your rule of three. You've got the encounter in the alleyway with Buster Keaton. You've got this other thing later where she maybe that could be like the through line. Did she or did she not kill these people? Are they still alive? And then at the end, you keep coming back to her growth of trying to like make it in Hollywood, and you almost forget these punctuations of outbursts of violence, but it's kind of there building up to something, and then it really comes out in the climax. I don't know. Again, I am rewriting this film in my head, and it's only because I think visually, in terms of the cast, even though I'm criticizing it for getting a bit too out over its skis in terms of the star power, I loved everything about this movie. This is the recurring theme lately for this summer with me. I love everything about these films except for the script. And it's a letdown because I love Pearl and X so much that I wanted this to be the perfect trilogy, which we just don't have. Mark, sorry, go ahead.
No, and I get where you and Jeff are both coming from, and I will fully agree. And I even said it in my, I enjoyed X, but X had its bumps, had its warts a bit, even though it was, as Jeff, you put it perfectly, Pearl was the bar raid. That Pearl was not a film I was expecting to be that good as it was for a horror film. I was like, damn, I came out of Pearl. That's one of those films. You guys all know it. When you come out of a film that's been really good, it just sits with you and you're in the car and you're just like, smile. You're just like, damn, that was good. It's like for sports people who their favorite team won the championship or whatever. It's a similar buzz a bit. Like you're driving, wow, that was really good. You just keep thinking about it, and that was Pearl. And then this one, Maxine, I was like, that was great, except for I really wish they would have taken some other opportunities, because there are some missed opportunities. I do have a theory about the final act, and maybe again, a lake from a puddle, but I'm wondering how much we saw in those last 10 minutes from the time she looks at the envelope address that's just sitting there the first time, that she tossed to the side, to when she's in her trailer and she does her line of coke before they call her, and she's dressed in the 50s, which another throwback to Pearl. In fact, the director says she's going to. I'm wondering how much of that was actually a Maxine fantasy and not actually reality. That after she looks at that address or whatever, she's preparing to get on set. She looks at that address and her brain goes into, because if you look, the quality is a little bit different. And like you guys all said, it's really weird. Suddenly you have this cult. Suddenly you have this, her dad is now leading this cult of people. You get into this kind of 80s shootout. You get up there and, the one cop dies, and then you hear more banging in the background. She goes up and you get the one, the female cop. She says, I stood up for, I believed in you or whatever. And she had the cross in her eye and she falls down. And then we cut to the interview she's doing to where she's saying, wow, and how was the Nightstalker your dad? And then we get to the Man's Chinese Theater where she's walking the red carpet all shiny. And then we cut to her back in the, with a completed Puritan 2 showing. And then we cut back to her in the trailer. She looks at the envelope again that's sitting there. She does her line of coke from the Goose, and they call her to set and they applaud. So I'm just wondering if maybe it was just clumsily handled, that was where she's getting interviewed, where it's a set where we see her blow away her dad's head was her fantasy, that she never actually went to the address.
I don't know. The bit of fantasy that I would take from that whole ending montage, or I'm calling it a montage because the last 10 minutes of this picture feels like they're throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall.
Right.
Because when the cops, the two cops that she's talked to, the two cops that kind of believe her and are helped her out with the shootout with this cult, everyone else in the cult, we assume, or that was at that site, has been shot or is dead. Maxine is standing holding a shotgun at a guy who's also been wounded. The helicopter is above her, telling her, put down the gun, don't shoot, whatever. And then we know that she blows his head off. So my question is, if she's the lone survivor for this whole thing, much as she was at the end of X, why is she on TV? Why does anybody believe her? Is there any evidence to point to her not being part of this organization, wrapped up in the murder somehow? It seemed a little bit too clean. I feel like Michelle Monaghan should have been like wheeled out with an eye patch or something to, say, I was with
or something.
Yes, because otherwise, because I was like, okay, so now she's not going to shoot her dad, because that would just be dumb. Because especially if there's cops on the way, or let's just assume that there might be someone with a rifle on that police helicopter that's over her, they don't know what the story is on the ground. They know that the cops have called because there's some kind of like people shooting people, or there's maniacs. It's just like the school shooter situation. That's why they say you come out with your hands up, because the cops, when they show up in the scene, they don't know who's who.
Right.
So they see someone blow someone's head off.
Right.
I'm thinking Maxine's going to get at least a bullet in the shoulder.
And that's why I think that end sequence is Maxine imagining most of that. It's not handled well,
No.
but while it's not handled well as far as is this reality or not, for me, I guess I put it in the context of, okay, if that's what he was going for, it would make a little bit more sense than if it was all reality, for those exact questions you talk about, Ian, because she does blow her dad's head away. Okay, why didn't the guys in the helicopter shoot her then? Because they don't know the situation. Why does this suddenly seem to be amped up when she runs into the suitcase that has the body parts at the end? The film suddenly does this odder style that we hadn't seen for most of the rest of it's very more Hollywood-wise. When she arrives at the location at night, from there to when she blows her dad's head off, and we get a little segment in between, it really feels like it's Hollywoodized in a different movie, and that this part may be in her brain. Now, I'm not saying that's true, but I'm just saying the way it was handled, everything about it, the way it was shot and everything, just felt like suddenly we're in a Hollywood movie. And then we cut back to her with set, and they're filming the final scene of the Puritan 2, and you're like, well, if they're filming the final scene of the Puritan 2 here, how was she at the Man's Chinese Theater? So I really think that
it was confusing.
I don't
think,
like. I know where you're going, Mark, and I don't think it's a fantasy. I think it's just sloppy because I don't think there was enough. There was not enough fantasy in the rest of the film to warrant us having an unreliable narrator at the end. Now, we didn't talk about Lily Collins, who, she gets pretty close to top billing in the opening credits, and then she shows up in pretty much a cameo. But man, what a cameo! And what I think what that says about the character is the level of smarts that that Ty West needed to apply to the rest of his character, because the way she's talked about, she was the star of The Puritan, the movie that they're now making a sequel to, that Elizabeth Debicki wants to make a smarter, bigger movie, right? And the way she's talked about, like, oh, she's going to be on set, tomorrow, so you can say hi to her and meet her and everything. She's kind of built up as this star of the horror genre. But then when she's talking to Maxine, just outside her trailer, she's talking about like, yeah, it doesn't really translate. Yeah, my screaming face is, and a whole bunch of, they wouldn't have called them memes back in 1985, but you can imagine like political cartoons or gags or something like here and there. But it didn't really boost her career into a more legitimate career. That would have been an interesting stepping stone. I want to get from porn into horror movies. I want to get from horror movies into legitimate films, which a lot of scream queens, Jamie Lee Curtis aside, found to be very difficult. It was almost an entirely similar box to try and break out of. Where is that story? There's so much going on underneath the skin of Maxine, the movie, not the character, that I just wish the movie had focused in a way that Maxine and Pearl did on the really interesting themes going on in these characters' lives, rather than this kind of sensationalism. Hey, we got Kevin Bacon, we got to use him.
And if you're going to do Richard Ramirez, which was a big story then, and grant you, Hollywood was, obsessed with that for a year. And then you don't do anything with it other than it's just background window dressing, sort of sidelights, or maybe it grounds it in its period. It would have been interesting if you'd gone the path of Maxine taking out anybody who was threatening her on her rise to fame, on she's going to do this, and maybe they're deserving of it, like the Buster Keaton character or somebody else, Private Eye or whatever. But then everybody's paying attention to the one serial killer and not paying attention to the fact that she's also a serial killer, which would also have been a kind of funny comment on sexism, because of course, he's the typical
couldn't be a woman,
killer,
right? Yeah,
but they're not paying attention to her as it. I mean, little things like that could have been maybe meaningful as far as having him in the thing, other than he's really there to provide mostly just, I think, a sense of dread that maybe he's going to have something to do with the story, or that vibe of LA in the 80s. But it's a missed opportunity on a couple levels as well. And to the earlier points that both Katie and Mark were making, maybe unnecessary to have it all, knowing that they don't really do much with it.
Here's how you end the movie, Jeff. You've got let's just assume it's one giallo killer who's going after Maxine. They're out at like 2 a.m. in the streets of LA. And as the killer has, Maxine cornered or something, or he's stalking her down the alley, the Nightstalker shows up and kills the killer. And Maxine gets away.
Yes.
And at that moment, that's when the neighborhood shows up and they find, hey, look, it's the Nightstalker. He just killed somebody. And then
that's pretty witty. That's a pretty witty
once upon
end.
a time in Hollywood ending that this movie, I think, could have used. But and
then she doesn't get the chance to shine like she might have been able to exploit the news and use it for fame, because the whole community gets the press afterwards, with them being interviewed.
What kind of a world do we live in where a man dressed up as a bat gets all of my press?
Oh, my press, yes.
Well, and also, can we talk about how hard is it to get a Screen Actors Guild card? Because at the end, when she's like snorting, the cocaine, she's doing it on her Screen Actors Guild card with a $100 bill. That I thought was actually very funny and clever. But
that got a big laugh in my screening. I was like, wow.
But
by the way, one other Easter egg too for you, Katie. Did you notice that the elevator up to the special mansion at the end, that's right out of Body Double?
Yeah. Yes. I was just thinking it was behind the green door.
Out of like To Live and Die in LA. I got a very To Live and Die in LA
I think it was there too.
This film that I haven't seen people talk about. I know a lot of people are talking about like hardcore and stuff like that, but I from the get-go was getting a lot of To Live and Die in LA. But
for sure,
go back to the ending. One of the things I thought was that didn't make sense to me is that when they show her on the red carpet and then they say 1 month later and then she's on the set of Curtain 2, I was like, well, no, that couldn't have happened. So, so why did we do what? I don't. What are we doing? See,
and
again,
Puritan, and neither Puritan 1 or 2 look like what Catherine Bigelow did with Near Dark. They look like so. If Elizabeth Debicki's character is supposed to be Catherine Bigelow, you got to make it look a little bit more special.
And that could have been a thing too, where, you know, Elizabeth Debicki's character, as much as she considers herself an artist, there could be the question of, are you actually a good filmmaker, or does the press somehow around this whole scandal elevate her film from a direct-to-video sequel to mainstream? And what does that do for the horror scene and her career? You know, I don't want to see necessarily a fourth film in this universe, except that I think there could be promise in doing a better movie than we got in the last third of this one, because it's so close for me on this. It's a mixed review, and that's with 3 X's. Anyway, before we run into the actual runtime of Maxine, I am going to let us all go. So thank you everybody for hanging out and talking about this movie. I love these conversations because there's so many different perspectives and so many ways to not only enjoy but discuss a movie that I find these really rich and fun. So I hope you all did too, and I hope that you out there watching, yes, you feel the same way. So I am Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat. We once again have Jeff York of The Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists. We have Katie Glidewell, the blonde in front, aka the bald in front, or I think I got that reversed somehow. Mark the Movie Man Krawcheck of the Spoiler Room and Special Mark Productions. Please check out all their stuff. Links are down below, along with the rest of Earth's Mightiest Critics. And join us back next time, whenever that is, whatever that is. This has been our discussion of Maxine. Wait, forgive me. Like and subscribe. And I should have done this before, but I'm rambling. It's late in the afternoon. Any final thoughts on Maxine before we go again?
I say go watch it. I mean, I think it definitely had, despite the fact that we've been, you know, we're critics, we're criticizing it. I think this is a film to go see. See it for Mia Goth. See it for, you know, the different people and the direction. See it for the soundtrack. Oh my God.
It's flawed but fun. It's still it's flawed, but it's still fun. And Mia Goth is it's a Norman Bates-ish kind of persona performance, I think, in many respects. A very accomplished anti-hero turn.
For the horror fans out there looking for at least something with a little bit of different approach to the horror genre that, you know, you may find lacking so far this year, I would say go see it, because if anything, as we've all said it, Mia Goth, you don't see Mia Goth in this. You see Maxine. You know, you saw her as Pearl. You saw her as Maxine in the first in X. She is a wonderful actress, and she is the appeal alone to watch her. But I think the story is good enough for at least a matinee price to go see, get some popcorn, have some fun with it. And if you're a fan, for sure, check it out, because for all the Easter eggs and everything this wonderful panel has already said. So.
And see it, because the practical effects are nuts.
Yes.
You'll understand.
Guaranteed. Was that remember the dog, Katie? Do you think that was just a hot dog? A hot dog right off, left over from the craft service table. What are we going to do here? We forgot the prosthetic. Are there any hot dogs left over?
I guarantee, like, if you could put, you know, they used to in Paranormal Activity, they would have like the night vision cameras to capture the screen, so when the commercials. I want to see, you can't show that on television, but just the moment, I want to see every guy in the audience crossing their legs during that that pivotal moment. Wow.
We had that in our theater. All the guys in the audience, it wasn't a big audience, but everybody went, ooh, and I heard some guys behind me going, oh, damn, oh.
But yeah, my last comment will be about Mia Goth. I disagree, Mark. I only see Mia Goth when I'm watching these movies, but she's so intriguing to me as an actress because she always takes these very oddball, depraved kind of roles, whether it's Nymphomaniac or, oh my gosh, that Robert Pattinson space movie where she gets melted into a black hole. The Ty West trilogy.
The Claire Denis film.
Yes, I just get the feeling that I'm watching someone who just got into Hollywood because she's strange enough to just play these wackadoo characters. She's like, yeah, I guess my name will be Maxine, or you can call me Pearl, but I'm just gonna be Mia Goth. And she's so fascinating. I don't know if I ever want to meet her in real life, but I love watching her do her thing. And I think that it's unfortunate that this movie, I feel like pop culturally might have a bigger profile, or at least maybe a bigger marketing push than Pearl, because I think she definitely should have been nominated for an Oscar for Pearl. Anyone out there rolling their eyes like a horror movie actress? Yes, a horror movie actress should have been. She should have gotten the gold for this.
The great tragedy of Hollywood is that if they do nominate performances from a horror movie, which is very rare, more often than not, they are like established stars, or sort of have a certain cachet playing those kind of roles, as opposed to organically coming sort of out of the horror genre and doing superb work in them.
Yes.
Well, the thing is that horror is still a dirty word. They won't call it horror. They'll call it psychological thriller.
Yeah.
They'll call it
elevated.
elevated, nuance. They'll say anything it is besides horror.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it's like there are people who are arguing that Silence of the Lambs isn't horror, that it's like, a psychological thriller. I'm like, there's enough decapitations, a different thing that I'm going to call it a horror film, and whatever.
It's about a serial killer. I think that would qualify it as generally horror. So,
and the same thing with like Kathy Bates and Misery.
Misery,
it's
yes.
like,
Misery's a horror.
Like that is straight up horror. It's like, oh my God, what she does to his legs, what she does mentally to him, that is effed up. Like, no, that is horror, and she's amazing.
Yeah, this is probably the topic for a whole other show, which I'm trying to wrap up right now. So but no, it's just I'm going on. I'm like opening up tangents we should all talk about. I gotta shut up. But no, like for me, like it's not horror, it's a psychological thriller. I'm like, what the hell do you think horror is?
Right.
But anyway, thanks, gang. I really am going to let everybody go now, but we'll talk more horror coming up, I'm sure, at some point very soon, because the summer is not done with us yet. But anyway, thanks, everybody. Take care. And go see Maxine.